Today we are going to be doing the fundamentals lesson for November. It is a very rainy day outside. In fact, if I'm just quiet for a second, maybe you can hear it. You can hear Poppy, my dog. What we're going to do is actually make the front and back of a greeting card. And I've started out by using washi tape. Just a roll of washi tape. It doesn't matter what the pattern is. You know, as long as you don't mind using it, then use washi tape or masking tape and just laid out a square. And the reason why I did this is to give myself some nice crisp edges because we are just going to flood this with color and pigment. And the first step to this is to create some blocked out areas. So I'm actually going to use the Frisket liquid mask, and I'm going to take just a regular brush. I've actually just taken this brush and lightly run it through soap so it has a protective film on it. And this is not one of my favorite brushes, it's just one that's kind of in my B pile of brushes. So you can take anything, even a toothbrush. And I'm just going to take a little bit of this on my brush. And I'm going to grab something else. It really doesn't matter what. And I'm going to tap. The direction that you tap in is the direction that the splatter will go. This is the same technique that you would use if you were splattering pigment. And I suggest at home, it's not pretty, you know, I try and set up something that you want to look at, but I suggest that you put newspaper or, you know, recycled paper down because splatter goes everywhere. You just can't control. That's the whole point. So I'm adding little dots, which will eventually be blank paper. And I'm pretty happy with it where it's at. Less is more. So I'm going to now go turn this off and immediately wash that brush out and put the lid back on to the Frisket so that it's a polymer base, so you really want to make sure that you wash it out well from your brushes. So I'm going to go do that. I'm back now, and what we're going to do is just let this first layer dry. Each one of these teeny tiny little dots is going to act like a resist, so when we paint over it, the watercolor will just be pushed away from those spots. If you were trying to create something that was the impression of snow, this is a really good way to start. What is going to happen is we're going to flood each one of these areas with a whole bunch of paint, and I have this is Winsor & Newton iridescent medium, so we can add that to some of the paint, and in person these cards will just be super sparkly and beautiful. And we're going to use a granulating paint as well. So if you have ultramarine blue, that's a great one to pull out right now. Ultramarine blue really just creates that deep granulation and lots of texture, and that's what we're looking for because we're going to explore our paints and at the same time create almost like a snowstorm effect with the watercolor. There are some other options. If you don't have the Frisket, you can always use white paint pens. This is the Uniposca paint pen, and you just have to pump it to make sure that you've got the ink really flowing and shake it out. I don't have as good effects with this or as good outcomes with this as I do just using the masking fluid. And honestly, if you don't have masking fluid, you can use a crayon. Those are resistant to water too. A silver or a white crayon, and you just, you know, tap it on the page, that would work as well. And that could be quite fun to see. So that is an option for you. I'm going to show you now how I'm going to mix this iridescent medium with the paint color. I've got this teeny tiny little vessel. I got this from my mom. I have no idea what it's for or where she got it, but it's gonna work for this. I think something else you could use equally is just like a bottle cap. because you really don't, this is like a less is more situation. You don't need a lot of this. And I think ideally you might use wet paint, so something that is in a tube. So I'm going to take this ultramarine blue and just squeeze out a little bit in there. I'm just going to mix that in now. And you can see it's going to give like a beautiful shimmer to that blue. And because it's ultramarine blue, which is a granulating paint, it should be quite interesting to see how this works. This is an acrylic medium. It's for watercolor, but it will dry like an acrylic. So do not put this in your paint palette thinking that you can come back to it the next day and reactivate it. It doesn't work like that. I think I'm gonna call that good, and that's just gonna be one of the things that I dip into to create this beautiful painting. As you can see, the Frisket mask has now dried, and it is actually kind of a clear yellowish color, and so now we can start to have some fun. I've got here an Escoda 10 Versatile, and I love this brush. It's one of the more affordable of a luxury brand. Escoda is a luxury brand. I do really recommend it if you want to try and go big and loose. It's a long-handled brush and it's quite fun. Any brush will do here. So even if it's not a watercolor brush, you can use a mop. You can use, I would say, just the broader, the bigger the brush, the better. And the longer the bristles, because you have less control, and this is about having fun, not having control. So I'm going to dip my brush into the water and start putting it onto the page. You'll notice that I have my hand higher up the brush, and that means that I've got a more fluid motion, and I'm doing a lot of flicking. This is working with water so that you can actually see the effects of your brush without having to commit to anything. Can be quite enjoyable. You know, it's going to dry, it's going to go away. But when you start adding the magic of color, things get really exciting. This is a Snowstorm, and I'm going to stick to some cool colors. Blues, maybe a little violets. You can use this technique with any color. I'm just putting a tiny little bit of pigment down first, and then see whether I want to do more of that. It's about enjoying the process, as opposed to thinking about making something representational. I'm going to take a little bit of this turquoise, which is going to read as a cool icy blue color, and let it flow up into that corner. Now I'm going to take a completely different brush. This one happens to be a dagger brush, and I really enjoy it for loose painting. Any kind of dagger, it's long and it's whippy, so you're not going to have a ton of control. And that can be really beautiful. So let's take a little bit more down here. And let that flow up into the water. I think, again, less is more. There's some areas that I haven't even covered, and that's totally fine. I think the main thing is just to work intentionally and don't let anything dry out. I've already got areas drying over here. I cannot now go back there unless I go with a darker, thicker amount of that pigment. So I'm just going to let that area dry and not worry about it. And I think it would be nice to bring a little bit more violet in. Violet, I think, is the surprising color here. I'm doing everything on almost quite an angle. I'm going to come back here with some of this turquoise color, which is like a cobalt turquoise, cobalt teal. Okay. And now what I would like to do is just take a slightly smaller brush, so I'll use this one, and I'm gonna take a little bit of the darker color and tap on some, just a little bit. Less is more. Okay. And maybe a little bit of this blue in some of the areas that are lighter. And you can even clean off your brush and use just plain water, which is a little bit more effective when this is drier, but that will push pigment out and create a snowflake-like effect as well. So I'm going to let that side dry, and the only thing you have to be mindful of is puddles here. If it's starting to seep over your tape, just go in, and I'm not putting this cloth on the actual page, I'm just wiping the tape off. And that pigment is going to come off the page through suction. So it just isn't like a puddle and everything flows into it and you kind of lose definition. And now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Everything has now dried here. It's about an hour and a bit later, and so at this point I feel comfortable enough to lift the tape off. But I think you can also evaluate, do you feel like it has enough pigment on it? Do you want to go in for a second layer? I think the second you go in on a second layer, you could be covering up something beautiful. So I would hesitate to do that unless, sorry about the dogs in the background. I would hesitate to add a second layer unless you felt like it was really lacking something. So I'm not going to do that. And the best way to peel this off is at a 45-degree angle. So it's coming gently. If it wasn't completely dry, I would have a harder time pulling the tape off. You can definitely reuse that. Now we have the fun bit here of taking off all of those little teeny tiny dots that we put on to start with. And I'm just taking my finger and running it over until I feel that the paper is smooth again. If it's not smooth, it's because you've missed one. I find, you know, your fingertips are very sensitive, and so that's probably the easiest way. Okay, so the next step is to either cut these out and use these as the actual card, but what I recommend is actually to scan these images, and then we can make cards, you know, multiple cards, and we can even put writing over it if you want to, and use this as a digital image for your card. So that is what I'm going to show you. The next step is to scan it. I've now scanned my image. I use an Epson Perfection V39, which is an independent scanner that I just plug into my computer, and I use the regular settings. I think it's really important to scan your images in at 300 dpi or more. Because I'm an artist, I actually scan them in at 800 dpi. So I'm going to go and recall those images that I've scanned and open them in Adobe Lightroom. This is a product that's available for free on your phone, but I use it as part of the Adobe Creative Suite, and so I've got it on my computer here for you to see. I'm going to just use it to do some photo editing, and essentially you could use any photo editing app. What you want to do is crop out the areas that you did not paint and adjust the values of the lightness, the darkness, and the saturation, as well as the hue, which means how warm it is or how tinted it is towards magenta, green, blue, or yellow. And once you have made these small adjustments, and you can always hold up your actual version of the painting as a reference. When you've completed making these small adjustments, it's just going to look a lot better when it gets printed out than the original scan. So I really highly recommend that you take the time to do the editing of the photo before you move on to the next step. Some of the files that I like to use to save my documents are either a TIFF or TIFF file. If I'm going to scan my image, I scan it in as a TIFF file, and then when I am completed doing all of my editing, I will either save it as a JPEG or a PNG file. And really it just depends on whether I'm going to be using that or what the end purpose is for my saved file. So it really is not a one answer fits all, but if at the end you have two edited pictures of your artwork and they are saved at 300 dpi or higher, and they are saved as a PNG file or a JPEG file, you should be able to use them for the next step. Now your files are saved. You can switch over to a browser and go to Canva, canva.com. Canva has a paid subscription and a free service for doing basic graphic design, and I recommend it. It's pretty user-friendly. What we're going to do is use it to create a greeting card. You can see I've navigated to the Create a Design section of their card templates, and I'm going to choose a 5x7 card. I start off by creating a 5x7 in a landscape, and the first thing you're going to do is go to the left menu bar, click on Uploads, then click on Upload Media, and select your two edited photos. I hold shift down to select them both and then click upload, and it will take a minute or two for them to load, but you can actually interact with them before they've finished uploading to the site. So you can either double click or you can drag your image over and start to play with it. You can adjust the size so that it completely fills the 5x7 shape. Or if you want a bordered look, you could also leave a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch border. What I like to do is add both pages and fill them completely with the artwork that we've created. Once you're happy with the position of your paintings on the 5x7 template, go ahead and select the Print Cards button up in the top right-hand corner. This is where they're going to give you a mock-up of what your card design looks like, and then give you a couple options, whether you want to print both pages or maybe you just want to have the front and the back left blank. You have a couple options of paper quality, and then you can get as few as one card for more money or multiples for a series of discounts. So I'm going to go for 25 copies for the $21, and I'm going to include the $4 envelopes and hit continue. If, like me, you're having trouble moving on from this step, it could be because you finished designing, but they haven't completely finished uploading. And so you can see over here, there's like the water is not completely full in the circle on the left-hand side. That just indicates that it's still working to make sure that your design is uploaded into the system, and you can't place an order or continue until you've finished uploading. So if that happens to you, you just have to be patient, go get yourself a cup of coffee. I'm going to show you again a different way of doing your holiday card. This time I've selected from their templates. I just searched the template 5x7 greeting card portrait. And so this orientation is going to be portrait, and we're going to use, there are several options that you can do actually. So if you click on the text menu on the left hand side, you can either select add and heading and then type in your own message and change the font. The ones with the crown next to them, you have to have a subscription to use those, but there's a variety of different fonts. I'm sure you can find one that you'll like, and then you can change the color and you can move it around to where you think it looks the best. So that's one option. The other option is if you go back into that text menu on the left hand side, you'll see that they have some suggestions with the fonts already laid out and cute little sayings. So you can select one of those and drag it over to your card, and you don't have to use the same text that they have. So I'm going to switch it to Happy Holidays instead of Cheers, and I'm going to change the color to white, and then I'm going to change the text on the bottom, make it a little bigger, and change where it is on the page until I think that it looks just right. And so that's just kind of a sneaky little hack to use their fonts and use their energy to make it look nice instead of having to come up with the design yourself. So once I've been happy with it and I have it looking the way that I want it to, I can go back over to the Print Cards button on the right hand side and start to order my cards. Again, the print cards is going to give you a mock-up of what your card looks like, and then give you some options on whether you want both sides of the card printed, what kind of paper, the matte or glossy finish, and whether you want to add your own envelopes, or sorry, whether you want to order envelopes from them. And then the next section is just going to make sure that you have a bleed, because this particular design goes all the way to the edge. So they want you to make sure that it doesn't just go to the edge, but it actually goes over the edge into filling out that whole red area. And that means that it's going to print without any margin of error. So once you've got that all done and everything looks good, I suggest before you order, you click the download button over there. It's an arrow pointing down to a horizontal line. Click on that button and save a PDF version you can actually just use that PDF version and walk over to your local print shop and get them to print them out for you. You don't have to use the Canvas service if you don't want to, or you can get your own cardstock and print it on your own printer. That's totally fine too. So you've literally done everything yourself that way. So this just gives you an opportunity to double check that you like the design. Next, take it off and print it and send it out to all those special people in your life that you want to spread holiday cheer. I hope you really enjoyed this lesson with me, and I look forward to all the other content that I get to share with you this month.